Hey there. Welcome back to CRYPTID'S Den. It's always so good to have you here. It honestly feels like catching up with someone I've missed. I hope life's been treating you gently lately. Let me know where you're watching from and how things have been. I really do love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and drop a little comment so we can keep the conversation going. Now, let's get into it. Every night, it was 3 knocks. No voice, no shadow. Just that sound against the wooden wall. I was 12 when it started. And somehow, I knew it wasn't the wind. You ever feel like someone's out there? Not to hurt you, but because they miss being seen? After our dad died, Mom moved us into a cabin with a quiet man named Rick. That's when the strange things began. Huge footprints in the snow, warm breath on the window, and eyes watching from the trees. Then Rick saw her, a tall, fur-covered creature, walking like a person, eyes full of grief. And beside her, a small child, thin and quiet. We called him Fen. The last time she came, she wilted. She left Fen at the edge of our yard and never came back. Rick built him a shelter, left him books, food, hope, and every winter, Fen returned. Never crossing the porch, just watching, never speaking. But he remembered everything. Years passed. Mom got sick. Rick left. And Fen vanished until Christmas 2020. Lucas and I lit the porch just in case. At midnight, 3 knocks. He came back. Taller. Silent, but he still remembered. Rick didn't ask. Didn't hug him. Just sat down beside him. And Fen did the same. Now Rick's 96, still in that cabin. And sometimes, in the snow, we still find little gifts. Stone hearts, a broken doll from our childhood. A reminder that love doesn't need words. We thought we were saving him. But maybe he saved us. The snow that year came early. I remember it because it covered everything before Thanksgiving. Not just the trees or the trail behind our house, but the noise. The fighting. The way Mom had been crying in the laundry room, thinking we couldn't hear. Dad had said we'd go sledding that Saturday. Just the 3 of us. Me, Lucas, and him. He packed hot cocoa in a dented thermos, wrapped us up in mismatched scarves, and drove until the roads narrowed and the trees stood taller than power lines. There was a hill he liked near Elk Ridge, not far from the old ranger station. He used to come here when he was our age. He said snow tasted different at the top. I don't remember the last thing he said to me. I wish I did. But I remember the sound of the sled, the way it cut through the snow like it knew where it was going. I remember Lucas's laugh echoing across the hill, our gloves slapped together in high fives, and I remember turning back to wave at Dad, only to see him on his knees, one hand clutching his chest, the other gripping the snow. It all went quiet, even the wind, even the trees. We screamed. I ran to him. Lucas fell trying to catch up. His eyes were already closed when I got there, and his face was pale and never seen again on any living thing. Mom said it was a heart attack, quick, no suffering. But I remember the look in his eyes just before they closed. It wasn't pain. It was fear, like he didn't want to go yet, like he knew we still needed him. That was December 1995. We didn't go sledding again. Not that year, not the one after. Maybe not ever. Mom, the kind of slow that doesn't make a sound. Not at first. She smiled at the funeral. She baked banana bread for the neighbors. She answered phone calls like nothing had happened, but she stopped sleeping. I caught her once, sitting in the living room at 2 a.m., holding Dad's boots, just holding them, rocking gently like she was trying to remember the weight of him. Then came Rick. She met him at the hardware store. He was older than Dad had been, lived alone up in Maple Hollow, built his own cabin from scratch, wore flannel shirts like a uniform, quiet voice, eyes that didn't miss a thing. Mom said he made her feel like she could breathe again, said he reminded her that not everything breaks when it's old. So we drove up. Maple Hollow was like stepping into a forgotten photograph. The kind where everything's faded except the snow. Pine trees lined the dirt road like sentries. The sky was a soft gray, and the cold clung to your skin like it knew your name. Rick's cabin sat just off a ridge, wood darkened by time, roof sagging slightly under the weight of the season. But it felt strong. Solid. He greeted us with cocoa. Not the instant kind. Real milk, melted chocolate, cinnamon. I didn't know people still did that. Lucas wandered around, poking at old tools and strange rocks lined up on the windowsill. I noticed Rick had journals, stacked neatly on the shelf. No titles, just dates. That night, the wind howled so hard I thought the trees would snap in half. Around midnight, something knocked. 3 times. Not loud, not frantic. Just deliberate. Rick froze. I watched the color drain from his face. Mom stirred but didn't wake. He stepped to the window, looked out. Didn't say a word. I followed. Pressed my face to the glass. There was nothing there, just the porch, the snow. Except fog. And a mark on the lower corner of the window. A smudge, oval, like a breath. I checked again in the morning. It was still there. And outside, beside the firewood pile, a footprint. Huge, 5 toes, human-shaped, but twice the length of mine. No shoe, just bare. In the snow. I didn't tell Mom, but I saw Rick later that day, hunched over a notebook, sketching. The drawing made my stomach tighten, not because it was ugly, but because it was ugly. But because it was sad. A face, mostly shadow, but the eyes. The eyes looked like mine, like Lucas's. Like someone who'd lost something and hadn't figured out how to live without it yet. I stared at that sketch for a long time before he noticed me and slid the page underneath a pile. I never asked about it, and he never offered. But that night, I wrote in my own little journal, just 1 line. I think whatever left that footprint knew what loss felt like. And somehow, that scared me more than if it hadn't, because it meant something out there wasn't just watching. It understood. The first time Rick ever talked about her, he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the woods. I was 12. Maple Hollow had started to feel like its own strange kind of heartbeat. The snow came down heavier that year. Thicker flakes, slower air. You could walk 10 steps and disappear into your own breath. The silence in those trees wasn't empty. It pressed in. It waited. Rick was sitting on the back porch with a tin mug of something steaming. I just stepped out when I heard him say it. Low and quiet, like a confession to no one. She didn't blink. Not once. Just stood there. And watched. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I was supposed to have heard. But his voice carried differently when he talked about the woods. Not afraid. Not reverent. Just aware. Later that night, he told us the whole thing. Lucas had already fallen asleep by the fire. Mom was quietly knitting, her fingers dancing while her eyes stayed fixed on Rick. And I sat on the floor, pretending to draw in my sketch pad. But every part of me was listening. He said it happened in the winter of '92. One of the coldest nights he remembered, the kind that makes your breath freeze on the inside of the windows, not just the outside. He was chopping wood just before dusk, and something had made him stop. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. No wind, no cracking trees, just stillness. He turned, and at the edge of the trees, just where the fog starts to touch the ground, she was standing there. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Covered in thick black hair. Shoulders broader than his. Eyes set wide, low forehead, sloped jaw. And those eyes. He kept coming back to them. Not like an animal's. He said they looked like a mother's eyes. He didn't say she ran or growled. She didn't even move, just watched him. Like she was measuring something. He raised his hand, slowly, palm open, and she tilted her head slightly, as if to say she'd seen enough. Then she stepped back, one stride, two, and was gone. He waited there for a long time, he said, hoping she might come back, that she might trust him. That night was the beginning. Mom didn't say much after he finished, but she stopped knitting, and for the first time in weeks, she looked straight into Rick's face with something other than exhaustion. 3 nights later, we heard the scream. It came from the trees, far off at first, then closer. Not a wolf, not a coyote, something else. Something human, almost. It started low, like a groan from the pit of the earth, then rose into this pitch that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It didn't sound angry. It sounded wounded. Mom grabbed us, held our shoulders tight. Rick stepped outside with nothing but his coat and a flashlight. She tried to stop him, but he just said, "I have to know." I watched him disappear into the trees. The light from his flashlight blinked between the trunks, then faded. He was gone for almost an hour. When he came back, he didn't speak. He had snow in his beard, a scratch on his cheek, but his eyes were wide, as if something ancient had reached inside and touched a part of him he hadn't used in years. He said he found her, crouched beside a fallen pine. Not dead, not hurt, just tired. Breathing heavy, rocking slightly. Her hand, massive, gnarled with years, was pressed to her side like she was holding something in. She didn't look up when he got close, but she didn't move away either. He said he stood there for maybe 5 minutes, then slowly set a scarf on the ground near her. One Helen had made, soft gray wool. She didn't touch it, but when he returned the next morning, the scarf was gone. In its place was a stone, smooth, round, dark gray. Whispered it in the workshop, while I pretended to help him organize fishing gear. He held it in his palm like it was alive. He wasn't just living in the woods anymore. He was part of them, or at least trying to be. He began leaving things on the tree stump near the edge of the clearing. Apples, bits of cloth. One time, even a hand-drawn picture I made of a bear, though it didn't look like a bear. And things would appear and return. Tiny bundles of twigs tied together with braided grass. Stones arranged in perfect circles. Once, a feather I couldn't identify. Long, white, and warm to the touch even in the snow. Mom started noticing, too. She stopped calling it a phase. Stopped teasing him about his stories. I think she saw it in his eyes, this quiet, stubborn reverence, a belief he didn't need to defend. But she also started pulling back. She'd stare out the window at night, arms crossed. Sleep less, worry more. Not because she didn't believe, but because she did. One night, after Rick had gone outside to check on something, she said to me quietly, "Some things are meant to be seen once and left alone. Some things watch back, Ben." I didn't know what she meant then. Not really. But I never forgot it, especially not after what happened that next week, because Rick left another offering. This time a small pouch of dried meat, wrapped in linen. And the next morning, the pouch was untouched. But the scarf he'd given her weeks ago, it was back, folded, clean, and resting on the cabin steps. Not tossed, not dropped, folded. And beside it, pressed into the fresh snow, was a footprint, but this time smaller. I used to think monsters lived out there, somewhere deep, past where the trees got too dense for light, past where the snow stopped melting, even in spring. I thought they waited in the dark for kids like me to wander too far. But that night, standing at the cabin window, I realized something that shook me deeper than any scream or shadow ever had. Maybe some monsters didn't hide. Maybe they had children. And maybe they were just as scared as we were. It was the kind of night where the snow didn't fall. It drifted. Sideways. carried by a wind that whistled through every gap in the wood like the house itself was breathing. Rick had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that meant something was close. I saw it in the way he kept the lights dim, in the way he stood at the window longer than usual, shoulders set like stone. I was 16 by then, old enough to feel when something was about to happen, but not old enough to understand what to do about it. Mom had gone back into town for supplies. Lucas was sick, asleep with a fever, so it was just Rick and me that night, both pretending we weren't listening to the wind shift directions. Then it came. Movement. Just at the edge of the porch. Not footsteps. Something softer, like snow being moved aside by breath. Rick stepped to the door, hand on the knob, but he didn't open it. Not yet. He looked at me, just once. No words. Then he cracked the door, just enough for the heat to slip out and vanish into the night. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, right at the line where the trees stop, pretending to be friendly, was something small. It didn't run. It didn't howl or scratch or stare with glowing eyes like the stories say. It just stood there, thin, covered in rough, tangled hair, arms long for its body, knees locked as if it had been told not to move unless spoken to. Not human, not animal, but held like both. And it was shaking. I didn't breathe. Rick stepped back slowly, leaving the door cracked. I moved beside him and looked again. Behind the small one, maybe 30-40 feet back, stood a figure so large I thought at first it was a tree. But the wind moved her hair, not branches. She didn't blink. She didn't growl. She stood, back hunched slightly, weight uneven like one leg hurt. Her fur, if you could call it that, was soaked and matted in places, and down her side, across her ribs and stomach, were wounds. Not old scars. Fresh. Torn. Red. Her right arm hung low, stiff at the elbow. Her fingers, thick and heavy, curled inward like they hadn't been free in weeks. But her eyes, God, her eyes, she wasn't warning us. She wasn't threatening. She was waiting. The little one, he must have been 5 feet at most, glanced back at her, then forward at Rick, then closed his eyes, like if he didn't see us. Maybe none of this was real. Rick didn't step outside, but he knelt, slowly, like a man before an altar. He placed something on the top stair. An apple. Red. Unbitten. A piece of cloth. Not new. Worn at the edges. I recognized it from an old box in the closet. One of Mom's dish towels, and beside it, a piece of charcoal. No bigger than a finger. He didn't say anything. Just looked toward her. Not the small one. Her. And she looked back. Not like an animal looks at prey. Like a mother looks at a stranger and wonders if he can do what she no longer can. She didn't nod. She didn't signal. But something in the air between them settled. Then she stepped back. Not all the way into the woods, just enough to let him go. The little one hesitated. Clung to the air where her hand must have just been, then turned and walked toward the steps, one slow foot at a time, until he stood just past the edge of the light. Not on the porch, never on the porch. He didn't take the food, didn't speak, just stared, eyes wide, glistening, full of something I didn't understand yet. And then they were gone, not like smoke, not like phantoms, just slowly swallowed by the cold. Rick didn't speak for a long time after, but I saw the way his hands trembled, the way he kept staring at the spot where the little one had stood, like maybe if he stared hard enough, it would come back. It did. Not that night, not even the next, but days later, same time, same snow, same snow. This time Rick opened the door before the knock came. She was standing closer, not as tall as the first night, shoulders hunched deeper, eyes even more tired, and the little one was behind her, tucked into the curve of her side. But she didn't pull him close. She stepped aside, and he stayed. She watched Rick, Not with distrust, not with command, but with a kind of quiet hope that I still haven't found the words for. Rick placed more food, another piece of cloth, a small wooden carving shaped like a fox, something he'd whittled years ago, but never explained why he kept. She didn't move, but her gaze lingered on him, on the door, on the space between where he stood and where her son now waited. Then she took one step back. The little one. He didn't move. Rick didn't either. She gave one final glance, and then she let go. Not physically, not dramatically, but you could feel it, like a thread being handed from one hand to another. She turned, limping, dragging her bad leg behind her. And the boy, he stayed. I remember Rick whispering under his breath that night. I don't think he meant for me to hear, but I did. She's not giving up. She's giving him a chance. And that was the moment I realized, whatever she'd escaped from, whoever hurt her, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was trying to save something. Maybe the only thing she had left, and she'd chosen Rick to help her do it. He never stepped inside, not once. Not even when the wind cut like glass, or the snow rose up past his knees. He stayed where the porch light ended, barely touching the first stair with his toes, always watching, always waiting. The first few days after she left him, Fen would come around just before sundown. We'd hear a branch shift, a rhythm in the silence, and then there he'd be. Same spot, same posture, standing still like a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. Rick didn't push. He didn't coax or call out. He just opened the door slowly, like letting the warmth spill toward him might say more than words ever could. Sometimes he'd place something near the edge. A slice of bread, a folded cloth, once even a glove with a missing thumb. Fen never took anything while Rick was watching. But after the door closed, if we looked out an hour later, the gift would be gone. I don't think Rick slept those nights. He started waking before dawn, taking longer walks into the woods, always circling back to the same 2 trees down by the southern edge of the clearing. They stood close together, their trunks leaning like they were sharing a secret. It was there that Rick began building something. At first, I didn't realize what he was doing. He didn't tell me, just gathered scraps of wood, fallen branches, strips of bark. He worked slow, quiet, the way you might tend to an injured animal you're afraid to startle. He built a frame between the trees, arched it carefully, layered moss and dried pine boughs across the roof, found flat stones for the floor. And at the very center he carved out a shallow spot where snow could collect without soaking through. He made a seat from a split log, notched the corners like someone might want to sit and stay a while. And then he waited. The next day, Fen came again. This time, he didn't stand near the porch. He stood halfway between the house and the trees, turning his head slowly, like he was listening for something none of us could hear. Rick didn't move. He just raised one arm and pointed, not toward the cabin, but toward the new shelter in the woods. Fen didn't walk there. Not that day. But something in his shoulders eased, like he understood what had been built was meant for him. Later that week, the snow hit hard, heavy and wet, piled up fast. That evening, Fen didn't come. Rick paced. Checked the window every 10 minutes. Finally, he grabbed a flashlight and headed into the woods. I followed, not saying anything, just feeling the same tight knot in my chest that he carried in his shoulders. We found him, curled up inside the shelter, not asleep, just still. His back to the wall, eyes half closed, chest rising slow, and in his arms was the cloth Rick had left him. The same dish towel, pressed to his chest like it meant more than warmth, like it was the only thing left that reminded him of her. Beside him sat a pine cone, not random, wrapped carefully in braided roots, the way a child might tie a ribbon around a present they didn't know how to give. Rick didn't step inside. He didn't even speak. He just sat, a few feet away, cross-legged in the snow. The flashlight turned off, only the weak orange glow from the cabin window reaching through the trees. We stayed like that for a while, No words. Just the hush of snow falling onto branches. And somewhere, in the deepest part of the woods, the distant sound of something moving. Far, but not forgotten. The next morning, the shelter was empty, but everything inside had been left exactly as it was. The cloth folded neatly on the makeshift seat, the pine cone offering still tucked beside it. Rick went back inside and rummaged through an old box I hadn't seen in years. From it, he pulled out a children's book, faded with a torn corner. The kind Mom used to read us when we were small. The Quiet Forest. I remembered every page. Rick brushed the cover with his hand and carried it out to the shelter. He didn't say anything. Just placed it down in the corner, walked away. It was gone by morning, but 2 days later it returned. Same spot. Dry, folded shut. No snow on the cover, no marks inside. Only one thing had changed. A single acorn pressed between the last 2 pages. We didn't know what it meant. Not really. But I remember Rick smiling that night for the first time in weeks. Not a big smile. Not one that reached his eyes. Just enough to know he hadn't lost faith. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Fen came every few days. Sometimes he'd sit on the far side of the clearing. Sometimes we'd see him perched on a branch, high in the trees, motionless as stone. But more often, we'd just find signs. A new arrangement of rocks, a piece of bark carved with strange marks. Once a line of twigs curved into a crescent facing the cabin. Rick started leaving things he thought Fen might need. Flint, twine, a comb carved from bone. Fen never left a thank you. But the next snowfall, we found footprints all around the shelter. Not just his. Larger ones, wider ones, wider, older. Like someone had come checking, watching, deciding. Rick didn't say anything, but I caught him that night packing a small bag. Just in case, he said. In case what? He didn't answer. But he stayed up the whole night, sitting by the window, staring at the dark. And when the knock finally came, 3 soft taps on the side of the porch rail. He didn't go to the door. He opened the window, just a crack, and let the silence come in. The year we came back for Christmas, the snow felt heavier than I remembered. It made the trees look smaller somehow, like the weight of it could crush even the oldest pine. We brought everything with us, decorations, food, even firewood, just in case. Lucas brought his guitar. My wife brought sugar cookies the kids had helped her shape like stars and bears. I brought the one thing that had never left me since I was 6 years old. A hope I couldn't shake, even when it hurt to keep carrying it. The cabin hadn't changed much. Rick had kept it up better than we'd expected. The porch still creaked in the same spot. The wood stove still banged once before catching. The couch still smelled like pine and old blankets. We strung lights across the front windows, the kind that flicker like candlelight, and set the little tree in the corner. The kids helped hang ornaments. One of them had been made by Mom before her mind started to slip. An old felt moose with buttons for eyes. I didn't say anything when I saw it in my daughter's hand, but I had to step outside for a few minutes and let the cold bite my skin. Rick sat mostly in silence that first night, watching, listening. Not to us, really. To the woods. Like some part of him had never come back indoors. He still did that thing with his hands, rolling his fingers slowly against his palms, like feeling for something invisible. His eyes flicked now and then toward the window, and then toward the door, and then back again. We set out the plate just before sundown. A wooden tray, simple and worn, with a slice of ham, a piece of cornbread, and one of the cookies. Beside it, a folded square of flannel. It had been one of Mom's old shirts, back when she used to sit with us on that same porch, reading to us when we were too young to sleep through the wind. And we waited. The kids fell asleep first, curled on the couch. Lucas dozed off by the fire, his guitar still resting on his knee. My wife lay back in the old rocking chair, breathing slow and steady. But I sat by the window with Rick. Neither of us said much. The kind of silence that doesn't need words. Outside, the snow deepened. The sky turned the color of ash. Somewhere in the forest, something moved, but it never came close. And the porch stayed quiet. No breath on the glass. No shape at the edge of the trees. No knock. Just the wind, soft, constant. Like it was brushing the roof with a hand too big to see. We left the tray out all night. The next morning, the sun rose pale behind a curtain of falling white. Rick opened the door slowly. He didn't speak for a while. Then he stepped out and crouched low. The tray was empty. Not knocked over. Not disturbed. Just clean. The cloth gone. The cookie gone. Even the crumbs. And beside it, a set of tracks. One set. Toes, splayed slightly. 5 of them. The snow had preserved every detail. You could see the line of the arch, the ball of the foot, and something else, too, beside the tracks, hanging just below the railing, tied delicately to a low branch with a twist of bark. A single strand of long dark hair, wrapped carefully around a pine twig. Rick didn't move for a long time. I stood beside him, my hands in my coat pockets, heart loud in my chest. We both stared at the offering like it might say something if we looked hard enough. Lucas came out after a few minutes and stood behind us. He didn't say anything either. It felt like something had been said, but not to us. That night, Rick wrote something in the old brown journal he kept near the kitchen stove. He only wrote in that book when something mattered. Something he didn't want to forget. I caught a glimpse of the page as he closed it. Just one line. He was here. But maybe I've become too human to understand why he couldn't stay. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. We'd prepared everything, every gesture, every sign of welcome. We'd brought music, firelight, even the old traditions of cloth and food and folded care. But Fen hadn't come to be seen. He'd come to remember. And maybe that was all he could give us. That night, after the others had gone to bed, I stepped outside alone, the cold bit sharp against my cheeks. I walked down the trail toward the shelter Rick had built so many winters ago. The snow had nearly buried it, but I found the outline, brushed back a layer from the roof. The door still opened, slow and creaking. Inside, the air was still. The log seat was bare. But on the floor, just beneath the bench, was something small. A piece of bark, curved, smoothed on one side, and drawn into it, faint but careful, was the shape of a hand. Not large, not small. Just human enough to make me ache. I didn't touch it. I didn't take it back. Some things aren't left to own. They're left to remember, and maybe that's all this ever was. Not a reunion, not a return. Just a reminder that he hadn't forgotten, that he still watched, still listened, still remembered the porch light, but chose, for whatever reason, not to come inside. The last time I saw her whole was the spring of 2014. We had taken Mom down to Boise for tests, and Rick had stayed behind at the cabin. At the time, we still believed the worst thing we were up against was her knees and the little forgettings. Where she left her glasses, who called last Tuesday, the names of certain towns she'd driven through 100 times. But we were wrong. It started slowly, like everything else does when it's slipping out from under you. At first, she would stop mid-sentence, frown, and wave it off like a gnat had flown across her train of thought. Then came the nights she didn't recognize the room she'd slept in for years, the stove she'd cooked on, us. I remember the day I brought her a framed photo of Dad, one I kept in my wallet since I was 16. Her hands shook as she held it, not from emotion but confusion. She looked at it like she was trying to piece together the meaning of the colors. Her fingers tapped the glass. Then she whispered, "Who gave me this?" Rick didn't say anything for a long time after that day. He sold the old truck, packed what he could carry, locked the cabin, moved into an apartment in Boise near the medical center. It was the first time in 20 years I'd seen him wear shoes that didn't have pine needles stuck to them. The change didn't suit him. He moved like a man who'd left a part of himself in the woods and didn't know if he'd earned the right to go back. For a while, we all lived around her illness. Her bad days bled into worse ones. Some nights she called me by Rick's name, and others she screamed for Lucas to shut the door because the bear was inside again. She lost weight. Her voice got thinner. Once, I heard her singing to herself in the hallway at 3 a.m. An old lullaby no one had sung since Lucas and I were boys. Rick tried to hold on. He read to her every night, even when she turned away. He made her tea and folded her towels into perfect squares. He didn't complain when she spilled soup on the rug or ripped his books in a burst of confusion. But I could see it wearing on him. He would sit at the window sometimes for hours, staring out at nothing, whispering under his breath. Not prayers, just names. One day I caught him looking at a drawing tucked into his journal. I didn't ask to see it. I already knew. It had been over 2 years since the last sign. No footprints, no gifts, no sounds beyond the city noise. And when I brought it up once, gently, Rick just said, maybe she took him somewhere better. By late summer, Mom stopped speaking altogether. She stared out the window with a look that made it seem like she was watching a place far from here. When she passed, she didn't call for anyone. Her eyes were open, but I'm not sure what they were seeing. After the funeral, Rick didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stood by her grave long after the others left, his hands at his sides like he didn't know what they were for anymore. That winter, I asked him if he wanted to go back to the cabin. He nodded once. It was quiet when we pulled up. The trees looked the same. The porch sagged a little more. The snow on the roof was undisturbed. Lucas had come with us that time. We didn't expect anything. We just needed the silence, needed the trees to remind us what it felt like to breathe. Rick walked the perimeter before stepping inside, like he was checking if the forest still remembered him. The door creaked the same way it always had. Inside, the dust hadn't touched the corner where Mom used to sit. Her scarf was still there, folded on the back of the rocking chair. I watched Rick kneel beside the hearth and run his hand along the floorboards. Then he sat. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. That night he didn't light the fire. Just sat there in the dark, listening. Lucas and I stepped outside for air around midnight. The snow had let up. The moon hung low, soft and yellow. The woods looked deeper than I remember. And that's when he said it. I saw something, Lucas whispered. I turned. When? A few weeks back, before the funeral. I drove up here alone. Just wanted to be somewhere quiet. I didn't go in, just parked and walked around a bit. Thought maybe. He trailed off. And I saw him. Not close, just a shape, standing between the trees, watching the cabin. Then he turned and walked back into the dark. My breath caught. Why didn't you tell Rick? Lucas stared at the snow. Because he needs something real. Not maybe. Not almost. I didn't want to give him hope just to have it die again. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Back inside, Rick had dozed off in the chair. His journal lay open beside him. The last entry was a half sentence. He waited. And below it, nothing. Maybe he had. Maybe we were the ones who didn't wait long enough, who thought silence meant goodbye. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way Rick had looked when Mom stopped remembering. Like something inside him had broken in a quiet, permanent way. Like he'd spent decades trying to hold on to a fragile trust with a creature who'd never once spoken a word. And now the only person who could name it, share it, even believe it with him, was gone. And what if that silence wasn't absence? What if the ones who stayed silent weren't lost, just waiting for us to listen again? I went to the window, stared into the black. Nothing, but the air felt full. And out beyond the trees, past where the moonlight fades, I swear I heard something shift. Soft. Barely there. Not gone, just waiting. It was Christmas Eve, 2020, and Rick hadn't spoken a full sentence all day. He moved like a shadow in his own house, setting logs into the stove with the same hands that used to carve birds from pine, brushing dust off the old bookshelf without even noticing his fingers trembled. His eyes didn't focus much anymore. They just drifted toward the window every time the wind shifted, or a tree groaned under snow. Lucas and I were doing our best to keep the place warm, both in temperature and memory, but it was hard to ignore the truth. Something in Rick had gone dim since Mom died. Not extinguished, just quieter, like a porch light left on during a storm. That night, we told him we were cooking dinner at the cabin. Just the three of us. We didn't mention the candles, the music, or the book. We just said it was time to come home, if only for one night. He didn't argue. We brought him up the mountain with the heater barely working in the truck, wrapped in 2 jackets and a scarf that had once been Mom's. The trees looked frozen in prayer as we climbed higher, limbs stiff, snow whispering sideways. The air was sharp, not cruel, just clean. Inside the cabin, everything had been set. Lucas had chopped fresh wood. I had swept the floors, lit the lanterns. The old tree, yes, that tree, still stood in the corner, years brittle but held up by habit and wire. My daughter had made a star out of foil and a pine cone weeks ago. She said, "Put it where he can see it, even if he's hiding." I didn't ask who he was. Rick settled into the chair by the fire like a man returning to the last place he'd felt whole. He didn't say a word, just stared at the flames like they were a language he hadn't heard in years. I handed him the book, not a new copy, the same one, worn, water-damaged at the corners. The Quiet Forest. He took it without blinking, rested it on his lap. His thumb tapped the edge once, twice, then stilled. The air that night had a weight to it. The air that night had a weight to it. Like every breath had to pass through time before it reached your lungs. We ate dinner in soft conversation. Shared stories the way people do when they're circling something unspoken. Lucas played a few quiet chords on his guitar. Nothing structured. Just sound to keep the dark from closing in too tight. And then it happened. 3 knocks. Not loud. Not fast. Not even from the door. The railing. Rick froze. His eyes sharpened. For the first time in years, they didn't drift. I stood. So did Lucas. We didn't rush. Didn't whisper. Just moved as if waking from a long, slow dream. Rick rose last. He walked to the door like a man walking toward a promise he didn't think the world could still keep. He opened it, and there he was. Fen, no longer a child, taller than the frame of the porch, hair long and streaked with silver, shoulders broad like he carried something for too long. His eyes hadn't changed, still the color of stormlight, still carrying that look, part question, part memory. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Rick stepped forward. Slowly, every joint announcing itself like a door creaking open for the first time in years. They stood a breath apart. Then Fen knelt. He reached into a satchel made of woven roots and leathered hide, pulled out something wrapped in layers of moss and cloth. He placed it on the porch steps, gently, like laying down a piece of himself, and backed away. Rick knelt too, unwrapped the bundle with care I hadn't seen in years. It was the book. The same book. The cover restored. Pages flattened. Water stains softened. And on the last page, a pressed flower. Ghost pipe. Pale and strange. The kind that only grows in darkness, feeding on memory, not light. Rick's hands shook. He looked up. Fen stood still, just breathing. Their eyes met. 2 fathers, one still human. One not quite. Rick whispered something. I couldn't hear it. Maybe Fen did. Maybe he didn't need to. They sat together like that for a while. Not touching. Not speaking. Just sitting. As if time had agreed to pause for them. As if the forest held its breath. Eventually, Rick nodded once. And Fen stood. He turned without a sound. stepped into the snow like a shadow rising in reverse. He didn't look back, but the snow swirled behind him like something grateful. Rick stayed on the porch until dawn. He didn't go to sleep, didn't ask for help. When I checked on him just before sunrise, the fire had gone cold. But the book was in his hands, and his lips were moving, reading. The porch light stays on now. Rick says it's not for him. He says it's for anyone who remembers the way back. I think he means Fen. Maybe he means himself. Or maybe it's for both. For the part of us that went missing and somehow still finds its way home when the snow lays quiet and the trees don't speak. After that, Christmas Eve, Rick didn't return to the apartment. He didn't even pack. We left the city behind in pieces. The lease expired, the mail stopped coming, and the world in its usual way didn't ask questions. Some lives are loud. Others vanish gently, like breath fading from a window pane. He lives full-time at the cabin again. There's a nurse who comes up once a week from Twin Falls to check on him. Young woman, soft-spoken, likes to knit, but she doesn't stay long. She doesn't need to. Rick isn't dying, not in the way most people mean it. He's just letting go of all the noise that never mattered. His hair is mostly white now, but his back is straight. His voice, when he speaks, still has that timbre under it. The kind that holds your attention like firelight. The forest has changed too, but only in ways you wouldn't notice unless you'd lived here long enough. Some trees bear scars they didn't used to. There's moss growing in spirals near the South Trail, arranged with care, not chance. And sometimes, just before dawn, we find shapes made from twigs left on the railing. Patterns only Rick seems to understand. Fen never stepped onto the porch again, but he's been back. We know because the signs are deliberate. 3 pine needles braided and wrapped in bark, left beside the fire pit. A small circle of river stones pointing east. One morning, Lucas found a feather tied to a reed, hung just high enough that only Rick would see it when he stood from the rocker. When I asked Rick what it meant, he smiled and said that he still listens. Rick doesn't write in his journal much anymore, but he keeps the book close. The quiet forest sits on the windowsill now, beside a little carved fox and a jar of wild mint. Some nights I catch him, tracing the cover with his thumb, just feeling the grooves. Other nights, I think he's waiting. Not for Fen to show, but to be sure the path hasn't closed. Lucas visits often. Grace, she's 10 now, sharp-eyed, quiet in all the right ways. She draws what she dreams. And lately, her drawings have changed. Last week, she brought out a sketch of a tall shadow crouched beside a child-shaped figure under a pine tree. The figure was holding something, a book. In the background, a cabin with one light on. Her handwriting on the bottom said, "For the one who never left." We didn't say a word. Rick just nodded, folded the paper carefully, slipped it into the old journal. One afternoon, Grace came running in from the woods, breathless, cheeks reddened with cold, eyes wide. She said she saw something tall moving just beyond the clearing, not running, not hiding, just walking, slowly, watching. I walked her out there. We found the spot, no footprints, no broken branches. But one thing was there, a single stone placed on top of another, balanced so precisely it shouldn't have stood. Rick found us standing there and didn't ask a thing. Just brushed snow from the top rock, nodded again and said, "He is still learning how to come closer." I asked him later if he ever wanted to talk to Fen again. Truly speak, to ask questions, get answers. His voice was quiet when he replied. I don't think words would help. I think he already told me everything he could, just not in the way we're used to hearing it. He turned then, his eyes soft but sharp as ever. Kay came back. Then, that's all I ever needed. That night I stayed behind while Lucas took the truck down the ridge. The wind had stilled. The sky was bruised with stars, and the cabin glowed like something from a time we barely remembered but never stopped longing for. I stood on the porch, just beyond the light, the book in my hands. Rick had gone inside to rest. Snow fell lightly, barely visible, and I waited. I don't know what I thought I might see. But after a while, I heard it. Not a voice, not footsteps, just the trees shifting. The hush of breath in the dark, the silence you only earn after keeping a promise for too long. And for a moment I thought I saw just a shadow, taller than the trees show aloud. Watching, not from fear, not from guilt, just there. And then he turned, stepped back into the woods. No sound, no sign, except one. On the railing the next morning, a line of crushed snow where something had leaned gently. Not claws, not paws, just weight. Beside it, a bundle of ghost pipe flowers. Still pale, still full, even in winter. I called Rick to see it. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He placed a hand on my shoulder, looked toward the forest, and smiled like a man who understood everything worth knowing. Now I visit him every few weeks, bring coffee, sit on the steps. Grace sometimes comes too. She always asks to turn on the porch light, even in daylight. Rick lets her. Says it should stay on. Not just for Fen, but for anyone. Anyone trying to find their way back. Anyone who remembers what silence can mean. Anyone who's ever left something behind they didn't mean to. He's 96 now. Still walks to the edge of the woods every morning. Still listens before speaking. Still calls the forest home without irony. And every time I see him sitting in that old chair, the fire crackling, the light on, the book nearby, I remember one thing. He wasn't just a myth. He was someone we failed to understand. Until he showed us how to love without needing words. Sometimes, the things we fear most aren't dangerous. They're just misunderstood. And sometimes, what we call legends are simply lives lived quietly, out of reach of our noise, our assumptions, and our need to explain away what we can't control. But what if we paused? What if we looked closer? Not to conquer or define, but to understand. This story wasn't about monsters or myths. It was about the spaces between us. The kind where language doesn't reach, but meaning still exists. Where kindness can be offered without words, and trust can grow in the silence left behind. There are truths we inherit, and truths we choose. And this one asks us to choose compassion, even when we don't fully understand. To recognize that love doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes, it just stands nearby, waiting, watching, hoping you'll turn the light on and notice. Out there, in the places maps don't mark and science won't name, something ancient still walks, not for fame, not to be found, but to remember. And maybe, to remind us of who we once were, before the world taught us to be afraid of things just because they were different. In the end, it's not about what you believe lived in those woods. It's about what was kept alive, in the warmth of a porch light, in the quiet of a forest that still listens, and in the small sacred act of choosing to care, even when no one else is watching. Because some stories aren't meant to end, they're meant to echo. If this one reached something in you, something you didn't expect, let us know. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you felt, what you saw between the lines. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us keep these human stories alive. Stories that aren't about spectacle, but about soul. About what it means to be remembered, to be seen. Thanks for being here, and wherever you are tonight, leave the light on, just in case someone out there remembers the way back.